and welcome. You're tuned into The Current. My name is Erin Curran, and I am your host. The Current provides you with inspiration on sparking change, embracing your curiosity, and being open to the flow of life. On today's show, I'm so pleased and delighted to welcome my guest, Roxanne Baker, and her interpreter, Meryl Troop. Viewers will also notice a dog may be wandering on camera. That's my dog, Dee, so don't be surprised. Welcome, Roxanne and Meryl.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
And
to mingle with your dog as well.
Thank you. I am so curious to know about your projects and your life, Roxanne. On this program, I love exploring the topics of community and life change and what nourishes people. And I know from your bio that you have led a rich life, including being an instructor of American Sign Language at USM and Waynfleet, having a career in acting, and currently are touring with a show. So
Yes.
I'd love to talk about all these things.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I wonder if we might start with your life early on. You're a Portland native.
That's correct, yes. I was born and raised right in Portland, Maine.
And what was it like for you growing up?
Wow. There's been a lot of changes in Portland. I feel like Portland has become a big city, almost like Boston. Growing up, it really was a small town feel.
Yeah.
Everything was cute. There were a few stores, few restaurants, a few hotels.
Yeah.
Easy to find parking, easy to get around. And now, oh my goodness, the place has exploded.
Yeah.
It's a big city feel.
Yeah.
A lot of traffic, a lot of highway, hotels are being built everywhere.
Yeah.
A lot more restaurants. Now that's cool to have a diversity of food. I'm not complaining about the number of restaurants there. So it's really great. Parking has changed a lot too.
Yeah.
The economy has changed and that really helped the city, obviously. But it's not the same. Portland itself is not the same as when I was growing up, so. But I still love Portland.
Good, good. And I love it too. I moved to Portland in 2005. So I've been here a number of years, but did not grow up here. So I can really appreciate the evolution of the city from someone who was born and raised here. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your piece that you're touring with now, your performance piece. I know it's called The Promised Hands, Coming Home to Jewish Deaf Roots. And tell me what you talk about in this piece, if you would.
Sure. It's nice. First of all, let me say it's really nice to be back in the studio and on stage after a very long hiatus. As we said, I grew up here in Portland.
Yeah.
I went to the School for the Deaf, and my story is based on true stories, true events that happened at the school. And it's my way of sharing my story to claim my liberation. Growing up, I hid part of my identity, especially my Jewish identity. I was the only deaf Jewish child at the entire state-run School for the Deaf, the only one. So I wasn't in tune with my identity as a Jew. It wasn't a pleasant experience. I was bullied. And now I know the term anti-Semitism, which is again on the rise, but Back then, I had no idea as a child. And unfortunately, I didn't think it would get any better. So now I feel it's my time to stand up and tell the story and share the situation of what happened to me. Now, keep in mind, the story that I tell is not all negative. There's many, many positives. It leads to the sharing of my purposeful life. And my goal is to make sure that this scenario is not repeated for other young students. I did not feel like a victim. The point is more that I now view myself as a warrior, as a survivor. And I tell my story now as an inspiration to those of you who may be suffering and feeling victimized. It led me, the bullying I faced led me to hide part of my identity and led me to feel like I didn't belong. It was a struggle. That's how actually I got into the field of acting. I was learning to experiment with trying on different roles, to play different characters, anything other than playing who I was.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I really wanted to hide that part of my identity. So this story, it's based on a true story. And I feel like at this point in my life and at this time in the world, it's important for people to know that that happened. And to know that everything is not hunky-dory in the world, but there's other elements of people's lives, and we can get beyond the painful parts. And it's okay, and it's okay for me to share it now. Compared to back then, I never would have come out about any of this. So now, working with Meryl, the interpreter, we teamed together to make the show accessible and to share this important story. We've started touring around. A lot of people can relate to this story. You don't have to be Jewish to relate to this story. The elements of being bullied and finding your identity are universals.
Absolutely.
So it helps other people get in touch with their own experiences and to know that there's other choices besides going for counseling. You can get up and tell your story. That is one way of healing. And hopefully I'll inspire others to open up about their experiences. And we can all share our journeys. That's the point of it.
Yeah, I find it inspiring, and I'm compelled to say that I think sometimes as humans, we put people in categories and say, okay, this is a deaf person, or this is a Jewish person. But we're complex creatures. And so to think like, oh yes, here is a deaf person who suffered bullying as the only Jewish person in her community, maybe sheds light for people on the fact that that complexity exists in all cultures. And that it's so easy to lump everyone together as one culture, out of ignorance. Just like, saying all people from New York City are like this or that. I know that that's not true, being from New York City, but, that's just one example.
Yes, exactly, spot on.
And what you say about speaking your truth and telling your story as a healing outlet, I think is really interesting.
Yes, yes.
Have you been able to have conversations after your shows with audience members?
Yes, yes. There have been people who come forward, and more people approach me after the show, and number one, often they apologize for what I had gone through and tell me they'd like to see more or that they can relate. The synagogue that I go to in South Portland, Bet Ha'am, has asked me to speak to their Hebrew school students because many of them are the only one in their public school who is the only one who's Jewish. I spoke at the Portland Public Library. Maine Moose, you familiar with that storytelling organization?
Yes, I am.
They invited me to tell the story. So I'm looking forward to presenting this in more venues. Maybe perhaps at some schools for the deaf or Gallaudet University, not limiting it to Portland, Maine.
Yeah.
There's Jewish deaf conventions in other places. Oh, that's right, I just remembered this summer, next month, there's a Maine Jewish conference in Waterville. And they have asked me to present up there as well. So the story is, in fact, spreading, and I'm looking forward to more opportunities, more visibility for this message.
Good. And I'm aware that my dog is going around the studio making noises. I don't know if the viewers can hear, but if you hear any noises, that's my dog exploring the studio. I appreciate you rolling with it and going with the flow. So one of my questions to my guests is, how do you feel part of community? How do you cultivate community? And how do you know, I guess, the importance and, for someone out there who may feel alone, watching, who may feel isolated, like they don't belong, is there anything that you've done in your life, you've learned over the course of your life about finding community and intentionally cultivating that you could share?
Well, I'm happy you've asked me that. It's a great question. Well, to start with, I was born and throughout my childhood, I felt different, and I didn't know why. I knew something was missing, and I didn't know exactly what it was. For the first 3 years of my life, I was not identified as being deaf. At the age of 1 and 2, my parents suspected there was something different about me. They knew I wasn't speaking. They took me to a doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh, don't worry. When she gets into school, all those children around her will be speaking, and she'll pick up language then." My parents didn't really buy it, but back then, you assume that doctors knew better. Now we have something called the newborn hearing test, a newborn screening, which would identify immediately at birth. All children are given this test, but back then they didn't have it, so nobody noticed my deafness. My parents eventually took me to a second doctor, and the doctor told my parents, yes, your child is deaf, but they also said, your child will live in her own world. And my parents were devastated by this news. My mother loved music. That was her interest. She ran a record store and loved music. And her love of music, she knew, could not be shared with her deaf child. So that's something that kept us apart. That kept us really isolated, but it wasn't really true what the doctor had advised. Once they knew that I was deaf, they brought me to speech therapy. That was the first thing that the experts advised, and I went to speech therapy endlessly. I felt like a parrot, copying mouth movements, and, I had no idea what these sounds were that I was mimicking. They just threw words at me. It wasn't learning language. Now, at that time, after about a year or two of that, there was a speech therapist, thank God, he worked in this same place. He was a CODA, Child of Deaf Adults, CODA. And he's the one who told my parents that there was a school for the deaf right over there. The deaf school is technically over the border into Falmouth, the Governor Baxter School for the Deaf on Mackworth Island. Right there across the cove. My parents had no idea that there was even a school for the deaf right nearby. And I'll never forget that first day I walked into the school for the deaf. They took me there to see if it would be a good match. And I saw everybody signing. I saw the facial expressions. I saw hands moving. And immediately I knew that was my community. That was my tribe. Those are the people to hang out with. And my language blossomed. I took off. And found my identity as a deaf person rather than this person stuck repeating sounds that weren't natural to me. That's what fed my soul, using American Sign Language, and that's my adopted community. Now, understand that for deaf people, neighborhood does not equal community. Those who can communicate with us, that's our community. And those are the people that I feel I grew up with. Now, even though bullying happened at the School for the Deaf, it still is a place that I treasure because it's where I acquired communication and language.
Yeah.
So I was willing to put up with the bullying so that I could be with my people. So that's what happened growing up in childhood. And then I became a self-advocate, and I realized this was not okay.
Yeah.
This was not acceptable, and I told my parents what was happening, and my parents figured out ways to put a stop to it. They went into the school and addressed the administration.
I could really imagine how having found this community and, like you said, having blossomed with your language and expression, really not wanting to acknowledge any trouble or not wanting to even talk about the bullying because this desire to fit in and be part of. Did you experience that? Like maybe it's not so bad?
Yes, exactly that. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. But eventually you did leave and find another community out in California, is that right?
Right, right. Well, let me say a little bit more about that. So I'd say when I was 14, a teenager, I went to a youth leadership camp,
Okay.
specifically for deaf youth under the National Association of the Deaf.
Uh-huh.
And that youth leadership camp was during the summer. No, well, it was 1 week,
Okay.
a week long. And I met lots of deaf people from other places, and there were other Jewish deaf people. For the first time, I connected with other deaf Jews. And I knew, I knew there were Jews who could hear,
Right.
but they didn't know sign language. And ironically, my community, my deaf Jewish community, was not in Maine, but was from across the country in this leadership camp. When I came back here to Maine, I'd found some more pride and identity, and I realized I needed to transform that shame that was instilled in me from the bullying and unhide my identity, to allow that to grow. So I invited the non-Jewish deaf students to come to my home. My grandmother lived with us, and both of my parents worked. My grandmother was a more religious Jewish. She celebrated the Sabbath every Friday night and lit candles, and she'd make traditional Jewish food, matzo ball soup and noodle kugel with raisins and delicious Jewish food. So what I decided to do was to expose the other deaf students to this Jewish way of living and the Jewish food, and they would come over to my house. I started inviting them, and that was a way to expose them and to open up their way of thinking about what it means to be Jewish.
Yes.
And that started to relieve it. And when I got to Gallaudet University, I met so many other healthy deaf people, deaf Jewish people. It was nourishing. That was something that nourished me for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And allowed me to grow even further in my identity. So there's different elements of a community.
Yeah.
There's a deaf female community, deaf women at the national level. There's an organization called Deaf Women United that has a biennial conference nationally. That also nourishes me.
Yeah.
There's other events and workshops that we do, and we have opportunities to get together. Also, there's Jewish deaf conventions as well. I have not gone for quite a long time. I used to go.
Yeah.
Here in Maine, we have a deaf film festival.
Yes, yes.
That's at the University of Southern Maine. Every year they show films at the Deaf Film Festival, and that's combining art and deafness, and all the films are made by deaf people. And that's where I also get nourished by my deaf cultural community as well, and where we pass along information to the next generation.
Yeah.
We have a Deaf Culture Festival as well every year in September, the last Saturday in September. And we have a proclamation usually issued by the governor that we've recognized American Sign Language as the natural language of deaf people in Maine.
Yeah.
As for myself, I love the beauty of American Sign Language and deaf culture, and I love to promote it. That's part of why I teach at the University of Southern Maine.
And I hear, oh, go ahead.
And I taught at Waynflete as well.
Yeah. And I hear and I see in your expression how much you love to share the sense of community and the pride you feel. I think it's a beautiful language too. I do not sign, and I really am in awe of folks who are able to learn, just like any second language, fluency in American Sign Language. I have some friends who do sign and who have learned later in life, maybe not at the level of interpreters, but it's a beautiful, beautiful language. And I read in your bio that you're also passionate about early language acquisition. Does this go back to your own experience as a child, having that miscommunication with the doctor and not really being given the right resources?
Exactly. Definitely, exactly. You've got it. At birth, I was language deprived. I had no language, spoken or signed, for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, really, American Sign Language saved me. I'm so thankful for American Sign Language. I can express anything freely. There's no restrictions, no limitations. When I speak, I don't have perfect spoken language, and it's a struggle.
Yeah.
And it's not beautiful. I mean, maybe one-on-one I could have a conversation, I can get by, but that's no way to live a life, getting by without fluid communication. So when children are identified as deaf now at birth or early in childhood, many times they are not given access to American Sign Language. Now, 90% of deaf children are born to parents who can hear.
90%.
Yes, and only, I think 30% of that 100, if you look at all the parents of hearing parents of deaf children, only 30% are willing to learn sign.
Wow.
So 70% of deaf children are not exposed to American Sign Language. Now, parents who can hear envision their child to be hearing just like them, and you always want your child to be like you.
Right.
So they're told, and they often have the value of putting in a cochlear implant and getting speech therapy so that their child can enter into what we call the hearing world. Often it doesn't work. Often the child is language deprived. They have no usable language at all. They may discover American Sign Language much later in life, but that's so much harder. The earlier you expose a child to a usable language, the better, and the more benefit the child can gain. So what I can never understand is why people aren't exposing deaf children to both. Why not? If you value giving your child a cochlear implant, do that, but also provide American Sign Language at the same time. And that will lead the child to pick up whatever they can out of both languages, to withhold American Sign Language in hopes that they become like a mini hearing person is kind of ironic. There's an organization called LEAD-K, L-E-A-D. The L stands for language, equality, E, acquisition, A, and D for deaf. And the K indicates kindergarten ready. That's what's really important. It's a group that started in California. And the point is to measure benchmarks so that we can gather data about how a child is doing, no matter which language modality the parents choose, to make sure that we provide tools that would help that child grow and blossom.
Yeah.
And that they're actually acquiring language so that when they get into kindergarten, they're ready.
Yeah.
We've proposed a similar bill here in Maine. And it passed in the Education and Culture Committee. We're waiting now for the full vote of the House and Senate.
Oh,
So
exciting.
that's still active in the Maine legislature. And the goal is to reduce language deprivation, making sure that today's children have and those who educate them and love them have the tools they need to evaluate their language acquisition. And if it's not working, to consider other modalities. I'm passionate about that, and I want to make sure that deaf children of today have language as early as possible.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why I'm still on the school board for the Maine Educational Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing. The point is to expose children to a usable language. And my heart goes to American Sign Language. It's sort of their natural human right to have a language that works for them.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you talked about your passion. It's a perfect segue into, moving the body. It so happens that sign language uses the body. My passion, you may know, is movement and getting people in their bodies, moving for the health and benefit of maintaining our beautiful flexibility and strength as we age, moving following the design of the body. And I do this with a movement class called
Ooh, I'm
NIA.
looking forward to that.
Yeah, so this seems like a good time to do a little movement break in our program, and so I'd invite you viewers as well to get up if you've been sitting down, and I'm going to ask you, Roxanne, to pick a card from my stack of NIA moves. There's 52 in all, and I don't know which card Roxanne is going to pick, and then you can hand it over to me, any card. It's going to be a mystery. Oh, this is interesting. This is a good one. So I'm going to read what the card says.
Cool. Wow.
So this card is touching, and that's actually the 52nd. That's the final move when we do the moves in order. That's the last of the moves that we do.
Really?
So it was in the middle of the stack, but it's the final move. And I'm going to read what it says. I'm going to read the description. So if you stand up, if you're watching, it feels so good to stretch and stand up. So it says, relax into a comfortable base, which means place your feet in a way that feels good and solid. Use your hands to simply touch the things that are around you. Touch your own skin and the space around you. As you touch, sound the word chi. Use both hands. Connect and move energy by touching and sounding chi. Chi, chi, chi. Touching the body, connecting to the sensation and awareness of our own skin. Practicing all hand and finger moves in place while also moving freely around the room, touching the space, the air, your own skin. Now I'm going to read the benefits of this move, touching. Practicing touching is excellent training for increasing what we call your sensory IQ and for improving body awareness. Touch is the act and the art of transmitting nonverbal information and receiving physical information from your environment. Touching and sensing temperature, for example, or the quality of my skin. Is it wet? Is it dry? What does my own touch feel like? Is it gentle or sharp if I use my nails? It also moves neuromuscular energy and chi into the area you touch and will enhance the grace and mastery which you convey in all your movements. It can also help self-heal physical trauma and naturally guide the body into relaxation. So when we touch places that feel good to touch. We touch the arms, maybe the shoulders. What I love to do towards the end of a class is maybe find a spot on your back or neck or your scalp that could use some gentle self-healing touch. Maybe there's tension in your jaw. It just feels good to explore. And what we say in Nia is the feet are the hands that touch the earth. Because we move barefoot, our feet connect us to that sensation of the earth. So our feet are the hands that touch the earth, and our hands touch the sky. So we are connected to earth and sky and self through touch. Thank you for drawing this card, Roxanne.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Good. Well, let's sit back down. We have a little bit more time.
That was a beautiful flow as well, to incorporate all of that into one's body. That was beautiful.
Good, good. I'm glad. It's, you know, I think there's a lot of stigma in our culture about touching. And, you know, I understand that there's an appropriate way to touch, and that certainly we want to maintain healthy boundaries with people around us. But this is about self-touch and self-healing, and using the tools at our fingertips to awaken and enhance our own awareness of our bodies, because our bodies are our homes for our whole life. We get one, and we're with it for our life. And it's good to take care of it and get to know it. Yeah. So thank you for doing that with me.
It was a joy. I'm happy that I picked the right card. Wow.
Well, they're all the right card, yeah. There's no wrong card.
I look forward to learning more about NIA as well.
Oh, cool.
It's NIA, right?
NIA, yeah.
And what does that stand for? What exactly does that mean?
Right now, at this point, it's like its own word, like yoga is a word. NIA is its own word. Originally, in 1983, when the form was created, it stood for non-impact aerobics because it drew from 3 different areas: martial arts, dance, and healing arts. So there's 9 movement forms, but it's been around a while now. And so it's its own name, NIA. And the website is nianow.com if you want to learn more. There's videos and, yeah, it's good stuff.
I did look at some before I came here.
Yeah, you did your research.
And it seemed like a combination of techniques.
Yes, absolutely.
All integrated well.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Cool.
I wonder, before we wrap up, if you would be willing to talk about ways that you show up and give back to the community. I love to talk about service on this show because I think oftentimes in our culture, we overemphasize this idea of self-made person. I don't need anyone to succeed. It's all up to me. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that actually we thrive best when we receive from others and are giving to our community and really put down roots and cultivate that service orientation. I know you're a mom and a grandma, so that's a service of its own kind, raising the next generation.
Oh, yes, my preciouses.
And certainly you've already talked about how you are of service promoting early language acquisition with American Sign Language. And I wonder if there's anything else. Telling your story with this current show is an act of service.
Right. That's exactly how I feel about it. And as a mom, my children are CODAs, children of deaf adults. It's a phenomena unto itself. Now, I was the only deaf person and the only deaf Jewish person at the School for the Deaf. As I mentioned, my children were the only codas in their school, the only children who had deaf parents. Everybody else's parents could hear.
Right.
So it's interesting in that I somewhat replicated that experience with my sons.
Right.
And what I went through, I mean, compared to my experience, they were not bullied. They went to a good school that bullying was not at all an issue. But I made sure I went to their school and taught American Sign Language to their classmates.
Oh, neat.
So that they could also get involved. And my kids also taught some sign language as well. So that was part of our community service to the school, was to make sure that the other children were included. And then when they came to our home, they were included. They felt comfortable.
Right.
They could certainly ask for a drink or food or needing to use the bathroom, anything that a kid needs to communicate with their friend's parents.
Right.
We already had that bond. It wasn't something odd. So that was one way that I was of service to my children, is to make sure that their classmates understood about deaf culture, and that, you know, though we value diversity and intersectionality, we certainly wanted my children's classmates to not feel like they were the only ones who had different and odd parents, you know?
Right.
And there's other ways as well. As we mentioned, I'm involved with the school board. I was also involved in production of the vagina monologues that was performed by deaf women several years ago, and, you know, now part of the Me Too movement. The deaf women who were involved in this production were able to share their stories, and some of those women have had negative experiences, have survived trauma as women.
Yes.
And so it was a way to go through that process together as a group. And an outlet to express some of what they had possibly been hiding for all those many years and share their stories. That was one kind of service that I also did.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's so many different ways that one can give back to a community.
Yeah. I really appreciate you.
I mean, it's never about I. It's always about us. We can't thrive alone. We need community. We need each other. Ego is the problem.
Yeah.
When it's always about me and promoting myself, when I'm the savior, I'm going to help people, I'm the one who makes things happen, that's not my game.
Right.
That is not going to survive in our world. Everybody needs to contribute our own skills and gifts.
Yeah.
To create the beautiful whole community that we are. And that's how everyone will thrive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
Like these fabulous potted plants here, you know, they thrive and grow, and we are each a leaf on those branches.
Yeah. Absolutely. And giving back, I think, too, of the...
and the roots. Don't forget the roots. You don't see them, but you need to have the solid roots.
Yeah. Yeah. And you bring up the plants, and I can't, you know, I always think of the earth as a kind of body, an organism, and how, you know, it's that same thing, you know, giving back, not just take, but what's nourishing the earth that, you know, that I'm, the community here on earth that I'm a part of, the parks, my own garden, how am I giving back to the earth, and, you know, thanking this amazing natural resource where we are, you know, we've evolved and where we thrive, the only place we thrive, the only place we survive, really. So it all is tied together, and I just really, really deeply appreciate your presence on the current today, Roxanne. I've learned so much from you in this short time. And I know we have to wrap up, sadly. I'd like to keep talking. My dog has just finally settled down. It takes a while, so yeah.
See? Perfect match. And you know what? I didn't hear the dog. It was peaceful for me, and the dog is now peacefully, silently in her own world.
Yeah, resting, good.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for the experience and allowing me to share. Allowing me to be.
Yeah, to be
and
you.
To be with you.
Yeah, to be yourself with all the complexity of a human experience And hopefully our viewers, hopefully you will be inspired by a little bit of what you've seen today, inspired to learn more about deaf culture, to attend some of the festivals and festivities that happen right here in Maine, and to maybe even learn some signing yourself so that you can communicate with a broader, friend circle. So thank you again for tuning in. Thank you, Roxanne. Thank you, Meryl. And thank you, viewers, for watching. You've been listening and watching The Current, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Love you, mean it.
Thank
Everyone
you.
knows that sign, right?
Yeah.